Good morning, everybody. We'll be getting started in a few moments. Good morning, everybody. We're just letting a few other people in, and we'll just get started in a second. Okay, so I think in order to try and keep us on time for today, we'll get started now. Perfect. Thank you, Alan. So thank you all for joining us today. We're in the second of our artificial intelligence webinar series, where we're going to be talking about governance and ethical considerations for AI in non-profits. Quite the mouthful. So thanks, Alan. So just some housekeeping rules to say that the session is being recorded. It will be available on demand and be sent out after the session this morning. There's a Q&A box for any questions that you have throughout the session. We really want this to be as interactive as possible, so please do put your questions in there. But also excitingly, there is a prize today, which Alan will cover in a minute, for the best question asked. So we will be choosing that after the webinar and then letting you know. So please do put in your questions. And then if you need any more technical support, there is a chat box, so please put anything in there. So I'm Joyce Harman. I'm Head of Client Services at Hart and joined by my lovely colleague Alan Perestrello, our Managing Director. But also more importantly, we have Gous from Kerv. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Gous Uddin, Head of Consulting at Kerv Digital, and I look after the not-for-profit sector.
Perfect, thank you. So just quickly on Hart, for those of you who are not aware of us, we are a consultancy practice, and really what we're all about is enabling digital and change capability within the non-for-profit sector. Lots of stats there about our experience, so I'm not going to cover those off now. So over to you, Alan.
Thanks, Joyce. Good morning, everyone. My name's Alan Perestrello. I'm the Managing Director at Hart, and I really wanted to say thank you for joining us today on a great topic, the second in our series on artificial intelligence, looking at governance and ethical considerations for AI in non-profits. So as always, we like to start these sort of sessions off with some stats to sort of set the scene. And I found some very interesting stats from the Charity Digital Skills Report, 2024 version, which is available online for anyone that's looking at it. A great insight into general digital skills across the NFP sector, but there are some very good insights looking specifically at AI. So 65% of respondents surveyed agreed that AI is relevant to their charity and could transform it. However, quite interestingly as well, in the same survey, 22% feel prepared to respond to the opportunity and the challenge that AI brings. Again, looking within the same report, it's kind of interesting to see that the distribution of respondents, ideally everything would add up to 100%, but people can be answering for multiple stages in this particular survey. So we've got a lot of people, sort of still an equal number of people who are like you attending events, but also an equal number of people who are not yet looking at AI, which is totally understandable because there's a lot to cover in this topic and things are moving quite fast. However, we actually look at the two that are highlighted in terms of organizations that are actually developing policies and reviewing their governance. They're kind of probably where I would expect them to be at this stage, which is useful to know. And then things will kind of taper off as people are starting to get into it. Really interesting in the sense that there is very, very few people specifically hiring for AI. And I suspect when this report is refreshed in a year's time, we'll see quite a different distribution of these results. Looking at another survey, which I thought was quite interesting, and this time it's from Twilio. So Twilio is a kind of integration platform. They do a lot of sort of IT enablement sort of things around communications, and you've probably used some Twilio-enabled tools when you've been doing some customer satisfaction surveys, or if you've been engaging with call centers, etc. Twilio do quite a lot in that space. 90% of their respondents said that they were leveraging AI for one or more use cases. I think this is specifically around digital communications, and that's probably the easiest use case that we've seen across our own research into AI amongst not-for-profits. Then equally, in terms of a stat, 92% of nonprofits believe that AI will enhance their engagement with end users. So that's great, and I think that demonstrates that it's a great tool for kind of creating content, creating established better channels for engaging with your donors or your members, which is great. However, taken from the same survey, I thought it's interesting to see that 83% of nonprofits believe that they are being transparent about AI in terms of end user data. However, the end user survey, there's only 38% of them believe that there is transparency. So there is a gap there that I think that the industry needs to acknowledge and address. And I think that the reality is that people are probably doing a lot in terms of internal process and governance, etc. But it may not be clear to your end user stakeholders or to your members that you are actually engaged in an ethical approach to this. And that's where just a very ethical-based, transparency-based AI policy that you can circulate with your service users or your members to show them that you do have governance in place to address this critical issue becomes quite important. To help illustrate that, I've pulled out a quote here, which I think is really useful, and that transparency in AI is essential for trust, particularly in sectors where AI decisions directly affect individuals and communities. And I thought the communities addition here in this quote, which comes from the Alan Turing Institute. The Alan Turing Institute have created a number of test cases and scenarios and policy and guidance around the effective use of AI. They're probably one of the most worldwide recognized organizations, institute, looking at AI enablement, but also governance around AI. And I think it's interesting that they've also included communities, because if we think about what our sector, the NFP sector, does, it's really focused on both the individuals, but really actually also on those communities. And then I thought another quote here is very useful, and this is from Mustafa Suleiman, and he's saying the real challenge of AI is to make sure that its benefits are distributed widely and its risks are controlled. That takes a commitment to collaboration and transparency that we haven't yet achieved at scale. Now, it's interesting, if anyone, if you know about Mustafa, he was the ex-CEO of DeepMind, which is one of the forerunners of creating AI. That was acquired. He is now the CEO of Microsoft AI, and he is also the author of an exceptional book that I have to say I keep going back to, called The Coming Wave. And it's really a book that's quite balanced in its view of the power and capability of AI, which you would expect it to be for a guy who's this involved in AI. But it's excellent in terms of its balanced approach, in terms of saying there are issues here and they need to be addressed. And effective governance is really at the heart of what he's saying. Now, Joyce alluded to this earlier in the session. We are giving away a copy of the book. So for the best question asked, today we will nominate the best question that you've asked, and we will award the book to the person that wins that prize. So I thought it was useful to actually then start looking at, well, what are the risks associated with AI adoption? Starting off with looking at them that in sort of the ethical and social side, bias and discrimination is probably the most prevalent one. And I think that's the one that gets the most focus and attention. And I think that's entirely justified. If you think about all the sort of weird and wonderful, outcomes that you hear in the papers about AI getting confused and hallucinations and things going slightly wrong, it's typically the bias and discrimination that comes up to the fore. And that's because AI models are trained on data sets. And if your data set is not in itself aware of bias and discrimination, and that your large language model, what you're using your own or you're using some third party, if it's not aware of that bias, it can be quite difficult for the machine learning algorithms to make those determinations, because at the end of the day, we do have to recognize they're not human. They don't have all of that background yet that we have in terms of what bias looks like. It is developing, it is improving, but I think if anyone's embarking on any AI initiatives, this is the area that needs the most focus. Again, we've mentioned a lot around transparency, and this is really important in terms of demonstrating to your communities, your service users or your members, that if you are using AI, that you're doing it in a responsible way. And if you are forced to do it transparently, then you will be forced to do it ethically. And so that's why I think it's really important that transparency features really high in your checklist. And then looking at the risks around exclusion, it is possible to exclude people. We know about digital exclusion is still a topic in terms of elderly populations, underrepresented minorities, etc. So we do need to think about whether AI helps tackle those challenges or whether it's actually making it worse. And we need to make sure that there's something in our policies and our frameworks to address this point. Looking at kind of one that I think gets lost and is really quite important in the use of AI tools is around data and security, specifically the responsible use of third-party data services, specifically ChatGPT. There are tools in all of these products that you can turn off around what data you are putting into them, but by default, they are almost all enabled to allow you to take your data and to put it into the models. And so even an innocuous thing like taking something from a report and putting it into ChatGPT can actually take, potentially sensitive data and put it into a third-party model. Outside of all the sort of IP and commercial issues that might raise, you then have issues where you might not be in control of another third party suffering a data breach, and then you've allowed potentially sensitive information to leak out. So always assess where you are, and we've got some suggestions later in the framework for what you can do to manage that. Ensuring that you're regulatory compliant is really obviously important. So everything that you do around AI adoption needs to be thought about how you're ticking that box. And then obviously there's an issue here around data misuse in the sense that again, the machines and the machine learning are very clever, they're very capable, but they can get things wrong. And so you need to make sure that you're able to ensure that the data is in the right hands and that it's not being used for purposes that you're not aware of or don't approve. Operational and financial, I think these are kind of just general sort of IT topics, but system reliability is going to start becoming more and more important as people start to put more and more eggs into that AI basket. So that's something that needs to be looked at. And then specifically thinking about evaluating any of the AI outputs and looking for errors. They are not perfect, they will make errors. And so you can have a lot of issues here if you're giving, members data that says, oh, the AI determines that your membership status is due to renew and it's not, or there's a lot of things that need to be thought about here, and this is really about ensuring that you've done a lot of testing on these models to make sure that the data that supports them is error-free and is going to make sure that you puts you in a good light. There is a potential issue here around over-reliance on AI in the sense that as people start to get used to using these tools, and I'm probably at times guilty of this myself because it's just easy, we'll pop that into ChatGPT and we'll quickly do something. There is an issue here around over-reliance and then inconsistent performance that can stem from that. So people need to think about that, and this needs to be taken into account into a policy. Reputational loss is probably the most sort of prevalent one from a sort of outside perspective, and that can then demonstrate if you've got loss of trust. I think we have seen recently a few of the large language models get things wrong, and that's shaken public confidence. And at times, even for those technology companies that are publicly traded, have lost billions of dollars in their valuations where their AI models have got it wrong. So something to really pay attention to, and obviously, have a mechanism for dealing with negative publicity should that happen. And then the final one, which I think is really important, is kind of around cultural alignment. Within your organization, people will be resistant to change. And if they are resistant to change and you are enabling, AI models, people might feel threatened, about job loss, etc. So ensuring that people are on board is important because people won't obey the policies if they're not on board. And so that's really something that I think needs to be taken into account when you're designing your policy. So I think it's worth noting that the risks are real. However, you can mitigate and manage them. And that's what we really wanted to move to now, is just looking at what should an AI policy include. So, if we look at kind of including, starting off by sort of defining your clear objectives and scope and making sure that your, organization's purpose is really embedded into that purpose and scope. I think it's probably more important for the NFP sector to make sure that those mission and values are upfront and part of the policy so that people understand, why we're using these tools. It's to further our mission. Sure, there might be, efficiency gains, there might be commercial opportunities, but ultimately, I think it's always important to start with what's our mission and goal, and then, absolutely clarify the boundaries of AI use is really important to establish that in the scope. Then looking at ethical principles, this is really about establishing fairness, inclusivity, and respect at the core of everything that you do. So that needs to, again, also be upfront in a policy so that people understand, actually, before I use these tools, I do need to evaluate, is this fair? Is it looking at avoiding bias? Have we thought about these things? And it should refer to the governance framework for what people should do if they're not sure, but also if there's people misusing AI, etc., the framework needs to be able to address non-compliance from user perspective. Then we look at the risk management side of things, and this is quite self-explanatory, but it's really about looking at identifying the risks. So we've kind of covered those in the previous slide, but really digging into them in the context of your organization, and then looking at implementing a risk register so that you can look at them and manage them. And this is the first sort of, basis for kind of creating something that's mitigating the risk. And then outline mitigation strategies for each of those risks, and again, refer to the governance structures to enable people to know what they should do to help mitigate the risk. As part of your risk register, it's really important that you understand, which are the trusted and allowed third-party enabled tools. This could start to become quite a challenge for organizations because every cloud-based software as a service platform these days is touting their enablement of AI. And so you do need to look at all of those proliferation of products that are being used and have clear guidance in the policy that prohibits people from, just adopting new tools that look cool and sound great, but actually haven't been verified by the organization. Looking at data controls, AI is incredibly sensitive to and dependent on data, quality data, well-defined data, but access data as well. That's been well defined. So you need to ensure that all of your compliance is there in terms of, GDPR, if there are guidelines in, Chartered Institute of Fundraising, standards that they will develop over time. You need to ensure that your data controls support those. And then you've developed the policies, etc., for access control, data retention. All of these things are kind of foundational things that you probably have already, but they need to be evaluated and put into the specific context of AI to ensure that they're relevant. Then looking at transparency and accountability, as we kind of said, it's really important that you ensure that people are always thinking about transparency, and that, I think, engenders really responsible use, and therefore there's accountability. So you need to ensure that you've got clear lines of accountability, who can do what are the consequences of not following those things, and then really having a reporting mechanism for managing AI-related incidents. Assuming that this won't happen is probably foolish, so ensure that in your policy you reference how incidents will be logged and managed, and again, these need to be reflected in the framework to help manage them. And then looking at training and awareness, start by looking at providing AI literacy options for staff. This can be a number of online courses that you can adapt for yourselves. There are lots of courses out there that you can send people on, and also start looking at providing ongoing training because things will evolve. And very similar to how we now probably should be all tackling GDPR, cover the original training and then just make sure that everybody's on board with it. So part of onboarding, annual training, sort of checklist, etc., just making sure that everybody's thinking about this. And all of that will help foster a culture of learning to continuously adapt as the landscape evolves and adapts. And then finally, just looking at making sure that you've got something that references how you will monitor and evaluate the use of AI in your organization. Again, obviously ensuring that it's compliant and ethically responsible. And probably one of the ways to do that is establish kind of, 5 key KPIs to measure AI's impact on organizational goals, but also manage the risks that they may bring. And then obviously it's really important with anything of this, constantly review them. AI is an incredibly rapidly changing space. And so I would suggest that you review the policy once every 6 months. That then is supported by a governance framework. And then if we look into the sort of, details that you should probably be including in your governance framework, I think an absolute essential and a great starting point, and I think our guest Gous will kind of talk about this and his experience of it as well, is establishing an AI committee. That really should ideally be cross-functional. It shouldn't just be an IT function. I would encourage people to have IT represented on the committee, but all parts of the organization should be represented on that committee. Leadership, in terms of your senior leadership team, need to be represented there as well, but not at the expense of a large kind of cross-section of users as well. And then absolutely critical for this committee to function is to nominate an AI champion who's responsible for ensuring that it gets used and managed. Then looking at areas that we've already spoken about around review and evaluation, implement regular AI performance checks, evaluate AI models for fairness, accuracy, and ethical compliance, engage with other charities. And I think this is something that you can absolutely do to ensure that you've got those kind of feedback loops and you're getting best practice and sharing. The not-for-profit sector is phenomenal at being able to share this information, and I think that more should be done on this, and Hart Square will continue to further these things. So look out for initiatives next year to further enable these, and then start to think about how you can use feedback loops to enable that as well. Compliance and risk register, we kind of already spoken about these things. Maintain that risk register and ensure that you have something in place to manage risk, and ensure that you have something to mitigate it. And then ultimately, as you develop more and more risks and strategies for mitigating them, you'll need to ensure that you're proactive in the management of continually ongoing, looking at new risks and how you manage and mitigate them. And I would suggest that this part gets kind of quarterly attention. And then finally, again, we've kind of referenced it in the policy, but you do need to have a training program to monitor and evolve kind of how you're providing training. Again, things will evolve rapidly. So if you have something in the framework that instills kind of annual review training, onboarding training, etc., that will ensure that everybody in your organization is behaving responsibly in terms of their use of AI. So having all of these things in place, like a well-defined policy and a framework to manage it, ensures ethical, transparent, and compliant AI, whilst mitigating any of the risks that we've already spoken about, and protects your data, but ultimately is there to foster trust. And again, specific to the NFP sector, I think that's a really important point. So it's at this point that we really wanted to kind of get your take on things. So over to you, Joyce, for the poll.
Thank you, Alan. So let me just launch the poll. So what we're asking is, yes, what is the most significant ethical concern for your organization regarding AI solutions? So I'm just going to let that run just for a little bit longer. So answers like, bias and fairness in decision making. The one that's definitely people are clicking at the moment is transparency in the use of AI, and data and privacy and security. So let me just leave that for one more second, and then. Okay, great. I'm going to end that poll and let me share the results. So interestingly, 71% have said data, privacy and security, closely followed by compliance with legal and regulatory standards, and then bias and fairness in decision making. So I think that's really quite interesting. So we can think about that as we then move into bringing in Gous to start talking about his experience on that. So I'll just stop sharing those results. So yes, so Gous, thank you for joining us today, and apologies because I keep pronouncing your name wrong. I'm trying my best. Do you want to give us a little bit about your experience, because it's AI is a topic that not many people have a lot of experience in. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure, thank you, Joyce. So I'm Gous Uddin, Head of Consulting for the not-for-profit sector at Kerv Digital. My role is one of specializing in providing strategic guidance and implementation advisory services to organizations that are navigating transformational change. My IT career spans about 18 years or so. Past 7 of those I've focused on the not-for-profit sector, having previously served as the head of global transformation at the International NGO WaterAid. Prior to that, I actually led a group-wide business transformation program at a legal membership and regulatory body. But the interesting thing is my journey with AI actually began many years ago while I was a computer science student and exploring foundational theories around artificial neural networks, natural language processing, and machine vision. So I've had a very keen interest for quite a long time, and I've seen the evolution throughout that period. And it is quite good that we're now in a situation where some of these ideas have turned into products and solutions that people are starting to think seriously about implementing.
Fantastic. Well, I can see why we asked you to come today with all that background and experience. So thinking about that experience, if you had to sort of summarize, your overarching views on the subject of, AI ethics and governance, what would that be?
Yeah, I think there are quite a few areas to this, and Alan covered a lot of interesting and important ground that's hopefully given everyone some food for thought. But I just want to introduce this concept of can versus should. Um, so we often associate AI with sci-fi movies or robots taking over the world. I think some of the audience will know the sort of films I'm describing. But today's tools like ChatGPT, as an example, are helping us with simple tasks such as drafting emails and writing letters. So this contemporary view of AI, and I'm being quite specific about generative AI here, and language models, it actually ties back to something called the Turing test. So Alan mentioned the Alan Turing Institute. For those of you who aren't aware, this is a famous computer scientist and mathematician called Alan Turing. He's mostly known for helping break the Enigma code during World War II. But actually, in the AI community, he devised a test called the Turing test, sometimes known as the imitation game. And what it essentially does is it tests a machine's ability to mimic human behavior through conversation and language. So a human will be asked a question or a series of questions, a machine will be asked a series of questions, and if the audience is unable to tell the difference, then that was seen as AI. So that's a little bit of background around how it was tested historically. Now it brings us to the moral and ethical question as to just because we can, does it mean we should? So your audience, you might generate an email using ChatGPT. Your recipient won't be able to tell the difference, more than likely. Does that make it okay? Well, I think the answer does ultimately lie with individuals, organizations, and the communities we serve. So I'll give you an example. If you asked staff working within a charity using AI to generate emails, whether that feels ethically sound, you might receive a mixed reaction. Even more so, imagine, just picture like a legacy management team as an example, where you're dealing with sensitive issues like bereaved family members. I could imagine the opinion would lean even more towards it not feeling ethical or right. But if you were to reframe that question, such as whether AI could help with efficiencies, resulting in more funds being allocated towards end causes, that might lead to a very different answer. And therefore, open and consistent dialogue is essential, really, to navigating these different perspectives. Finally, ethical practice requires more than governance frameworks. It's about aligning actions with organizational values, missions, and codes of conduct. Generative AI might be new in itself, but these principles remain relevant. And if your organization doesn't already have such a framework, this could be the excellent opportunity or catalyst to have those conversations. So it's a really good opportunity for everybody to start thinking about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, there's a lot to unpick there, and I do really like that example. Just to say, we've got some great questions coming in, so I will make sure that we get to those. So I suppose really thinking, from your point of view and your experience, what do you see as the role ethical AI practices should play in, shaping our industry over the next decade? Kind of, what are your views on that?
Ethical AI practices should serve as a guiding framework for the non-profit sector, ensuring really that technology is deployed in ways that align with organizational values. It should enhance transparency and prioritize the communities we serve, really, because that's what we're here to do. Over the next decade or so, ethical AI can help non-profits balance innovation with accountability by fostering trust, reducing operational costs and amplifying impact, whilst also safeguarding against unintended harm or inequity.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alan, I just wanted to, on that one, sort of, have you any sort of thoughts as well around that sort of the ethical practice and shaping our industry over the next decade?
Yeah, I think it's becoming more clear to people that that great phrase about with great power comes great responsibility, and so I think I just encourage people to keep thinking about it. I know that I'll give you some of my personal experience here. Is AI tools come out and you go, oh, that looks cool. And I was guilty of this too. I was like, oh, cool, let's start using that and start using that. And actually, one of my colleagues was really right and correct to point out and say, you know, does this adhere to a policy? And we kind of stopped and said, what policy? And that was really a really good inflection point for me, as the sort of managing director responsible for our adherence on all of these things. And actually we should be, they've got an annoying phrase that I'm sure my colleagues have heard me use too often, which is, we need to eat our own dog food. And that meant that actually what we did is um, we stopped using some of those tools because we actually went through a process of thinking about it and evaluating actually, how does this adhere to the current policies that we had? But we very quickly realized that it's quite specific and we needed something specific to address it. So I think that the more people think about this point and it's used as kind of a counterweight to balance the enthusiasm and all of the innovation and all of those great things that we want to foster and we want to encourage around, responsible use of AI, but it's almost that everybody thinks kind of, oh, wait a minute, before I cross that road, I really should check left and right and right again, that kind of checks and balances. So I think as long as everybody is constantly questioning, is this right? And then there is a policy and a framework to go back to, I think we will have responsible behavior. I'm sure that people will get it wrong, but I'm pretty certain that in our industry, in our sectors, I think that people will be behaving responsibility be in a responsible way. So I'm heartened by it, and I think our purpose here today was to just try and keep shining a spotlight on the importance of this topic.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And yes, we have had definitely some interesting conversations internally at Hart Square around AI and AI policies, which I suppose leads on to my next question for you, Gous. So, how do we prepare our teams, for the cultural and operational changes that come with AI adoption?
There are a few things that we can do. So non-profits in particular can prepare teams for AI adoption by offering tailored training to build confidence and understanding, ensuring that we're aligning the use of organizational values and embedding the ethical guidelines into everyday practices. So just weaving, those policies and practices into your training content rather than just making it about technology. This also includes fostering open dialogue about AI's impact, providing practical tools for integration, and emphasizing its role in enhancing as opposed to replacing human efforts to serve their mission. I think that's quite a key one. I do have an example. So I mentioned that my previous role was at WaterAid. We actually formed a self-organized AI interest group that represented a diverse mix of people. The key element to highlight here was that it wasn't a top-down approach. There was no senior management directive here. It was very self-organized. There were people at all levels with all sorts of backgrounds. And it really acted as a safe space for members to experiment, to be open and candid, and also to naturally become change agents. Those individuals were going around sharing that information, and it just created a really transparent environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We have lots of questions coming in. Obviously, everyone's very interested in wanting to win that book. So I'm just conscious of that. So I just wanted to kind of move on to the next question, and then we'll make sure we have time to get through all the questions. So how can we ensure that the use of AI aligns with our company values and respects ethical considerations?
Sure. So to ensure AI use aligns with non-profit values, ethical considerations, I think it's worthwhile exercise trying to establish a governance group with diverse stakeholders, securing executive buy-in in particular. I think that was one of the questions that's coming up. Is quite important. And how do you do that sometimes when those senior level stakeholders aren't interested for whatever reason? Well, I think through collective advocacy, I really believe in strength in numbers. Try and find some key champions, particularly those who are influential, to work with you and do it as a collective rather than as an individual. And engage supporters, capture their perspectives through doing surveys, because we don't work within a vacuum in an organization. We have external stakeholders, whether they're donors, members, the beneficiaries of what we do, the end cause, the quite a mixture of people. And sometimes some of those voices are louder and have more influence than us as internal team members. I would also advise using a democratic decision-making process where possible. So balanced with the guiding principles and practical common sense as well. So obviously, if you go through a democratic process, but there's something that just seems completely odd, do challenge it. But working, as a collective and trying to make panel-based decisions is always a good thing rather than individuals. And that will essentially help to navigate differing views and maintain alignment with your mission.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yes, that sort of democratic process and getting everybody bought in, absolutely, completely agree with that. Thank you. So I'm just going to quickly move on to a poll, because I say I'm conscious of making sure we get to the Q&A part so I can ask all of the lovely questions that have been coming in. So Alan, if you just want to move on, thank you. So if I just quickly, 1 second. So what we're asking now is really, does your organization currently have an AI governance framework in place? So the overarching one coming in so far is no, but I'm just going to let this run for another few seconds. Interestingly, nobody has said yes, a fully established one is in place. So I think that also tells us something about sort of where we are and where the sector is. So I'm just going to end that poll and let me share the results. So yes, so the overarching winner is no, but planning to develop one, which I think also ties into some of the questions that have been coming in, and a lot of people planning to do it soon. But interestingly, yes, there is at least some people that it's in the earliest stages of development. So a bit of a mixed bag, but I think nobody confidently saying absolutely, that is it's fully there. Alan, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think probably one of the reasons why we're seeing no one on this webinar saying yes, fully established and in place, because you probably come to this session hoping to get some insights and some kind of guidance and nuggets from us. So I'm not too surprised by that one. I am quite heartened though that 61% of people responded and said no, but we're planning to develop one. And I think that kind of speaks to what I was saying, and that I think the NFP sector, and I think specifically within charities, what we traditionally call charities, fundraising and donor-centric organizations get quite a bad reputation. Whenever something goes wrong, there's a very big spotlight shone on the charity sector. So I think that's kind of created this culture, and I'd love people to debate this and tell me I'm wrong, but I think it's created a culture where we're a lot more aware of the risks. Probably compared to other industries. And so I think that means that people are looking at it. But I guess there's that other sort of truism that's coming to play here, which is the charities are not always awash with lots of cash and time and resource to dedicate to actually addressing this. And I think one of our guests, delegates today has asked that kind of as a question. And so I think it's about balancing, the time that it takes to be able to invest in these things. So I'm not too surprised by it. I am a bit surprised there's a few people who are saying no and no plans to import one soon. I guess that's people looking at it, and I'd love to know, is that, one question deeper there is that no, we don't plan to implement one because we've discussed it and we don't want to do AI, which I think is an absolutely valid and justified position, or is it no, we just haven't thought about it. So I'd like to understand that a little bit more. But Gous, in terms of your experience kind of now and also kind of previously with WaterAid, 'cause I think you guys were looking at this. What do you think, drives that desire to say, yes, we need to do this responsibly? What do you think is the driving force within organizations to do it well?
I think it's really about your mission and your reason for existence and the communities that you serve. I think when you look at it through those perspectives and charities, regardless of how they perform, the intention is always striving to do your best for those communities, trying to make as much positive impact as possible. So I think when you sort of combine the evolution of technology, which none of us are going to be able to stop, combined with the realities that this isn't going anywhere, and we're also trying to serve these communities and that sort of compassion that I suppose a lot of people in charities have towards those causes, that really gets the conversation going, stimulates ideas, and it really causes some drive towards putting things in place. I mean, from the perspective of WaterAid, where I was, we were, don't want to generalize too much, we were fairly risk adverse. So things that you mentioned in your previous slides, like reputational damage and so on, they were really quite high up in our risk register. So all of those things combined together, resulted in some positive discussion. But just to be fully transparent, we were quite early in our journey. I don't think anybody's really an expert yet. It's such a fast-moving and evolving subject that we're all figuring it out together, really. And I always encourage this sort of discover and refine approach. Don't be worried if you haven't got it right. Just make sure you've understood your risks and what the implications are if those risks materialize.
Yeah. And I think actually as well is that, if people adopt, and this is probably, it's definitely something that we spoke about in the first session that we did on AI, which was around kind of strategy, but was kind of, start small and start with, kind of a pilot that you can control and manage. But then, the adage there I would add to it is, if you keep it small, you do kind of keep the risk small. And then as you kind of proliferate, the risk, does naturally spread. So I think if organizations are risk adverse, and I think that's a fair position to take on a topic like this, then start smaller. And I think, as we get to the end of this, we'll definitely provide some guidance on, don't do nothing, but start small and then build it up from there. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting, and thank you to everyone for giving us your input on that. And I can see some really great questions coming through. So I'm going to move through the next section so that we can actually get to more Q&A topics. I think that's really the value here today. So moving on, I think what we wanted to do is to kind of, we always do these, is kind of try and leave you with 6 tips to ensure compliance and kind of AI, etc. So almost all of these 6 tips tend to start with the same, foundation piece. Define your objectives, and I think that's really important to make sure that Gous has said it, we've said it kind of, and I think this is really important specifically for the NFP sector. It's more important than for any other industry, is ensure that your organizational goals and values are included in your objectives and that they align with your strategy. Because I think that then helps shape what responsible looks like, but also where the value is. And I can see one of the questions asking, where's the value in this AI thing in our industry? And so we can talk about that in a bit as well. And I think really clearly define what your stated objectives are. Are you trying to achieve, efficiency gains? Are you looking to bring innovation into your service offering? Are you looking to improve or increase engagement? I think make clear that you're doing it for a purpose. The only one that I would say you shouldn't have is because we want to have a go. I think, do have a go, but make sure that it's aligned to a specific mission-led or strategic objective that your organization can get behind, and that ultimately enables and drives your mission. Doing it for the sake of doing it is probably not the best reason to start. So I'm looking at the second one, then establish a governance framework. And I think, we've provided some bits there, but absolutely. And I think Gous has kind of used this in his experience, and he said it as well, is form that AI committee, start by aligning clear roles. And, it can be a group of people who just meet, drink coffee and eat biscuits, but at least start it and give it some targets and give it something to do. absolutely designate what I would call an AI owner. You can absolutely come up with, your own name or terminology for this role, but it's one person who's going to lead the committee. Ideally, that would be someone on a board level, because then you ensure that you get buy-in, et cetera, et cetera. I would resist possibly, and those of you on the call who might be from the IT sphere, I don't mind if you argue with me on this one, but I would resist the AI owner being an IT person. I think if it's going to have legs and it's going to have value and it's going to survive, then sometimes things kind of get stalled and people go, oh, it's just an IT thing. We've got lots of other challenges to solve. So think about that. Your AI owner is going to be the person who's going to try and responsibly drive AI adoption. So thinking carefully about who that should be. Third one, and I've kind of maybe made this too bright a color here, but is kind of identify the risks. They are out there. We've spoken about it. But identify them, write them down. And when you write them down, and then you have another column to the right that says, right, how am I going to mitigate that? It kind of forces you to address the risk. In my experience with risk registers is that very, very rarely do you write something down in the risk and you kind of go, well, that's game over. We can't mitigate that. Let's just not go any further forward. So having that risk register and looking at it critically and responsibly will get you where you need to get to. Some risks are going to be generic to AI adoption, and you can find lots of information about those online, etc. But there will be some that are quite specific to your organization. I would suggest go looking for those and make sure that they are well represented risks. So if you're in the membership space, is it trust and transparency issues? If in the charity space, is it responsible use of data? All of those things, kind of draw them out and make sure that they are well represented on that risk register. Then kind of develop your policies that look to address those risks. So, if you start by that and then making sure that your policy also addresses your objectives, it should reference the governance mechanism. So non-compliance or non-adherence or failure to comply, whatever you put into the policy needs to have a linkage back to your governance, right? So if you're going to have disciplinary procedures in place because people don't adhere to it, you need to state that in the policy so that your policy has teeth, it has value, it has purpose. And then I think it's really important to set regular reviews to stay on top of this. If I think about the rate of change around AI capability and also the rate of change around AI adoption, it is phenomenal. I don't think we've seen anything like this. It's really interesting for those of you who do, take the time to read Mustafa's book on the coming wave. There's some really interesting parallels about previous, society-altering, innovation that has happened over millennia, and the rate at which it's happening. AI is outstripping that rate really, really quickly. I think it will start to plateau. For those of you in the previous AI session, we spoke about the hype curve, and I think we're at the peak of that hype curve, and things will now sort of start to become more rational. But it's been very fast, and I think through that rationalization of AI, we will then also start to see a need to continuously go back and review the policies and set that expectation with users that we might do this today, but things might evolve, and we might then realize that we don't like that particular AI model or that particular provider because their ethics don't align with ours, and we might need to change tack. That's kind of one of the downsides to being an early adopter on things is you need to be able to adapt. So set review points and make sure that you can stay on top of that. Absolutely provide training to all staff, not just people who are on your AI committee or people who are participating in your pilot. This is really about ensuring that everybody understands, because you can open up a browser and very easily create a ChatGPT account or a Copilot account. And it's very easy for people to just start taking, sensitive data and putting it into a third-party AI model. If they haven't been trained, there is a risk they will do that. In fact, I can almost guarantee it's going to happen. So when you're talking to people, base level AI training on ethics, usage, and responsibilities is absolutely essential. Even if, and this probably speaks to, people who said, we don't plan to develop a policy because we're not going to use AI. You have to provide something that says we don't use AI in this organization. So even if there isn't a policy, there is a position on AI usage needed, because leaving it open to interpretation and self-governance is probably not the best solution here especially in our sensitive sector. And then finally, again, kind of review and revise, continuously evaluate AI performance and policy compliance, look where people are, getting it wrong, and look to see if you need to change, tack, or you need to strengthen something. But I think this is definitely one that's got review and revise written on it. And again, it's probably best to look at that from a quarterly perspective. So without further ado, I guess, Joyce, that's a good time to hand it back to you and to manage the Q&A piece.
Thank you. So we have a lot of questions. So if we don't get through them all, we will follow up in writing with all of these so that we make sure they're all covered and answered. So one of our ethical challenges is considering the energy, water consumption of AI and its impact on the environment. This conflicts with our organizational values. Are there takeaways to adopt AI while keeping it green, or is it more something we've got to wait for the tech to be more evolved and more efficient? Gous, going to you first on that one, especially in mentioning water and your experience at WaterAid.
I think it's a bit of both. I think as technology evolves, systems will change, the way they work, the energy consumption. I think that sort of goes into more of a electronic engineering field, which I'll park if that's okay. But in terms of general use day to day, I think what I would particularly encourage is that there are lots of AI products out there. Some of them don't have a brand or logo behind them. The ones that do, I think generally speaking, they are striving to do the best they can, and they are trying to be transparent. So I would urge you to get in touch with the creators of these tools, or the partners that distribute and sell them, and try and understand what it means really. And sometimes there will be challenges, and it's about balance, right? It's the pros versus the cons, and we need to really just sort of take an objective view in the context of your organization and the standpoint that you have on these topics. So there isn't really a universal answer, but I would encourage dialogue and seeking the facts, and then just presenting it in the context of what you do and what there is to gain versus lose.
Perfect, thank you. I just want to make sure to try and get through as many questions as possible. One which we've kind of covered a bit, but I think it's important to reiterate again. So the question was, what approach to take when management have so many other priorities, for example, governance, compliance, that they are not investigating possibilities of how it could enhance the business? So, Gous, I suppose in your experience at WaterAid, was that a challenge, or how did you get people on board to be thinking about AI?
I think the mistake that we first made is trying to seek that senior sponsorship from the most senior person there is, who has the most decision-making ability. And actually, that's not necessarily the same person who shares the most enthusiasm about the benefits of AI. So I mentioned strength in numbers earlier, trying to rally support, get lots of people involved who are diverse. I find that external stakeholder opinions actually carry a lot of weight. So if you're a membership, for example, I know we've been speaking about not-for-profit as though it's a homogenous group, and I suspect, having worked in a membership previously, is quite different to working for a charity. And where you have members expecting an excellent service, if you go and do a survey and ask them what they think, and then present that to the decision-making panels, that can sometimes have an impact as well. So I think about the voice, the perspective, and how they're perceived by those people who make decisions. And sometimes you just need to mix it up a little bit, and the message will get through.
Perfect, thank you. Another question, I'm going to come to you, Alan, on this first, and then I'll come to you, Gous, the same question. So in this hyper fast moving field, many orgs will be waiting for things to settle down, to plateau. What factors should we consider when deciding the right time to engage? How do we know when we're at the plateau? That's a great question. Alan first.
I can imagine. I know Richard is definitely the best person to ask that question. Good morning, Richard. Welcome. Thank you. Good to see you again virtually. I think now is probably the time to do the foundation work on this. I think as I sort of mentioned, in kind of at that plateau piece, I think waiting any longer, you run the risk, and I think there's another question that kind of alludes to this, from Helen has asked this question is kind of, if you don't have a policy and you don't start putting something in place, people will just go and do it anyway. Reference my own example in my own organization where I should have been a bit more responsible, right? The hype is absolutely there, and it's moving so fast. And I think especially if you, and at the risk of trying not to sound ageist here, as an aging man, a younger cohort are going to be so much more on top of this. They're just going to not even think about the risks. They're going to be like, this is part of how we do things now. And so if you don't want to alienate, you know, those great young innovative minds that our organizations need to take us into the next decade, you're going to have to do something about it. So I think not doing anything isn't really the answer here. I think you're going to have to do something. And so therefore starting with something that is responsible and is well managed, and you've looked at the risks and you've mitigated them, I think that's where I would go. Membership organization like yours, I think you could do something around, you know, simple options would be things around possibly chatbots. You know, they're a bit done, and sometimes they don't really add that value. There are some things that we're seeing, to one of the other questions, we're seeing, you know, some kind of great capabilities coming out and some of the tech partners using these tools. So I think it would be looking at what is your biggest challenge in your organization, and look to see whether AI could solve it. Absolutely do it in a small way, in a pilot way. And I think it now would be the time to have a go at it and to do something. If you do it, just remember to make it transparent, put caveats on, hey, you know, dear, you know, membership, we're trying something, you know, we're doing it responsibly, etc. And if you ask for feedback, I think it's something that Gous said as well, ask for feedback, they'll feel like they're involved and they won't lynch you if something goes wrong when that does happen. So that would be my advice, Richard.
And Gous, anything you want to add on that point?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Alan's just said. I mentioned as part of my intro that I first got into AI back when I was a student. Now, if you think about it, that would have been about 20 years ago or so. And up until very recently, none of the big technology providers out there were prepared to put marketing and productize this technology like they're starting to do now. So I would suggest that it has reached a level of maturity that it's reasonably safe with the right controls in place to start using it and adopting it. But one thing that I would suggest is worth thinking about is this idea of sort of structured initiatives versus unstructured. And when I say structured, I mean, you know, implementing something, creating a project team or a working group. It's about the doing as opposed to it always staying within the brainstorming and idea stage. But if there is some anxiety around implementing, I would suggest that it's very difficult to suppress usage. Rather, if you create the right conditions and environment, almost like a laboratory, get people to declare what it is that they're experimenting with, trying to create a positive angle to it, build use cases from the grassroots up, and so on. It means that individuals are using the system, they're ironing out the issues, they're creating those lessons learned that are all important for everybody else. And then when you are ready, you can then start to go down that structured path and introduce some of those ideas and lessons that you've learned in a more controlled fashion and scale it up on a larger scale.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm doing my usual, conscious of time, and we have lots and lots of questions. We're not going to get through them all, but I know, Alan, you want to touch on some of them in kind of in the wrap up. But just to point out again, to say that any we haven't answered, we will follow up. So I'm going to hand back over to you now, Alan.
Thanks, Joyce, and thanks, Gous, as well for that. I think really useful. So a couple of questions coming in asking for, you know, examples of risk logs, etc. Yes, we can probably share them. My only caveat is, you know, use them as a starting point and, you know, evolve them. We are helping clients with this topic at the moment. So if you do need some help, get in touch and we can certainly help with that. Laura, to your question, great question. I can see that's got the most upvotes. But actually, I think moving to the next section, Laura, we're going to cover that hopefully in the next session, which is on the 23rd of January. We have a tech partner and possibly a guest client who are going to be showing us some really cool stuff that they're doing with AI in the membership space, but I think it's really relevant as well to anyone from the sort of more charity side of things. So do join us on the 23rd. We've got some great stuff to show you there in terms of real world, practical, great AI usage with benefits. And then, as Joyce said, we'll cover all these pieces in a follow-up. So I also wanted to ask people if you could please participate in our AI survey. We want to run this for until the end of the year. We will share the results with everybody who participates. We will also, publish them via LinkedIn, etc. But there's some really great insights there that are helping us understand how AI adoption is progressing in our sector. Once again, going back to Mustafa, I really, think he's got a great way of seeing this, and that is, we really need to define what acceptable use is, and then build those mechanisms and oversight and accountability. So, if you've got a guy who's kind of one of the grandfathers of AI saying be responsible, I think that's a good thing. So absolutely do find ways of reading even just some of the blogs and articles that have been written about his book. There's some great insights in there. This slide is actually a repeat and a reuse from the last session on strategy, and I thought it was just really useful still. All the points are still there. Establish that AI strategy, make sure it's iterative, start small, avoid the big bang approach. Things will change over the next months, actually. So plan for that. Ensure that you do have the governance framework in place before you start. And I think that's one of the questions that got asked, and I think we'll definitely address that one in writing and send it out later today. And I think, to the point, Richard, don't sit on the sidelines. I think, the journey is the destination here, and the more you learn on this, the better off you'll be. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Gous for being an insightful and experienced and knowledgeable guest. Thanks for Joyce to broadly keeping us on time. And again, thank you to everyone for joining us. Do register for any of our upcoming webinars, and wish you a great day. Thank you, everyone.